Hi everyone, welcome to our event this evening. Thank you so much for joining us as we launch Swimming Between Islands, the debut collection from Charlotte Eichler. I'm really pleased that we're all here together. My name is Jasmine, I'm from Carcanet Press. I'm just going to let you know what's going to happen before we jump into the reading. Now this evening we'll be together for about 1 hour. I can see that some of you have found the chat. Please do all find the chat, like say hello to us. Let us know where you're watching from. Please make sure that you change the option so that it says everyone, otherwise your messages will get missed by other people. So that's just one thing to watch out for while we're here tonight. Another thing to watch out for is that while Charlotte's reading later, I'm going to be sharing the text on screen, which is just a visual guide for you. Now, if you want to change the configuration of your screen, you can make the video bigger and the text smaller. Just have a play around with it. If you have any problems with any of the tech at all, if you drop a message in the chat, I'll try my best to help you over the course of the next hour that we're together. Now, I have put the link for you to buy your discounted copy of the book in the chat already. We'll go over all of that again later, but just to say thank you, we really appreciate you paying your £2 to be here, and we're grateful for your support as we keep publishing these books. So what's going to happen is Charlotte's going to read for us, and then she's going to chat with Rebecca Goss, who I'm very pleased is here with us tonight as well. And at the end of the event, or towards the end of the event, there's going to be time for audience questions. So we want you to be involved in the conversation, as well as in the chat box, in a different box, which is called the Q&A box. There's a different button. Please find it. If you get your questions for Charlotte lined up in the Q&A box, then Rebecca can put them to her later on in the event, and we can get you guys properly involved in the conversation. So I think that's all the technical stuff out of the way. Like I said, I'm very pleased that we're joined by Rebecca Goss. She's published 2 collections so far with Carcanet. The most recent was Girl, which came out in 2019. If you don't know her work, definitely go to our website and buy that book and check it out. In May of this year, we'll be publishing Latch from her. So that's the 3rd Carcanet book, her 4th collection, which is coming out in May. So please keep your eyes peeled for that. So I'm delighted to invite Rebecca on screen to join me so we can get started. Thanks, Rebecca.
Breathe a sigh of relief, Jasmine. I hit the right buttons. Hello, everybody. It's welcome to the launch of Swimming Between Islands by Charlotte Eichler. I'm really pleased to be here for this launch, especially as Charlotte and I do go a sort of a bit of a way back. I first came across her, well, we've never actually met in person, but Charlotte signed up for a course I was teaching with the poetry school about, I think it's almost 8 years ago now. And she was a really generous participant, really engaged in the material. It was an online course, but she was a really valued member of the group, definitely. But it became very clear really quite quickly what a strong poet she was. And I remember feeling very excited reading her poems. And ever since then, we've kind of kept in touch, and it's been a real joy to follow her career and see her gain more and more success. So to be here tonight at the launch of her debut with Carcanet feels really special. I'm really pleased to be part of that. Thank you. And huge congratulations to her. I'm so thrilled for her. For those of you who don't know about Charlotte, Charlotte Eichler was born in Hertfordshire and studied English literature and Russian at the University of Nottingham. She has an MA in Norse and Viking studies, also from Nottingham. Her debut pamphlet, Their Lunar Language, was published by Valley Press in 2018, and a selection of her work, which many of you may have seen, was featured in Carcanet's New Poetry's 8 in 2021. So I really like the blurb on the back of this book, and it says that Swimming Between Islands has its own distinctive weathers, atmospheres, and fauna. And that will really become apparent, I think, this evening when you hear Charlotte read the poems. But this islanded world that she creates in the book really does hold the human experience too. And Charlotte herself has written on the Carcanet blog, you can go back and read it, in her post from 2018, I think, has said that she herself is interested in how it's impossible to disentangle the human from the natural world. And I really liked that word, disentangle. And her poems really make us consider this, I think. So it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Charlotte to now launch Swimming Between Islands.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Rebecca. And thank you to everybody for coming along. I'm just wondering if I'm meant to see Jazz or not, I'm not sure. I think she's going to put the poems up on the screen in a minute and I will start reading. Yeah, it's really lovely to have everyone here, even though I can't see you, I can feel everyone's support. I'm going to read for about 20 minutes from the book. And I'm going to read the poems in the order in which they appear in the book, because I spent a long time deciding what order they should go in, so I think that makes the most sense. The first one I'm going to read is the first poem from the book, because I think it encapsulates a lot of the themes and atmospheres that appear throughout the book. It's called Eichler, Maine, and it starts with a quote from Lawrence Durrell's Reflections on a Marine Venus, which goes, "Eilemania, a rare but by no means unknown affliction of spirit. There are people who find islands somehow irresistible. These born Eilermanes are direct descendants of the Atlanteans." Eilermane. She thinks of unhatched things, Ida weaving slippery nests from the surf, sharp reins of skewer and turn when she strays from the path. Some days she misses people and sees them in seals strung out in lines beyond the breaking waves. With the toe in the water, she leaves rows of pleated shells, wedding dresses, and the trees filling with the robin's twisted ribbons of song. So this next poem I wrote after helping my friend Sarah, who I believe is in the audience, take her baby twins to a swimming lesson. And it was a lovely but quite strange experience as someone without children. The poem contains a reference to a fish called a barrel eye fish, which some of you might have seen in Attenborough programmes. And it's called Baby Swimming. My friend and I each take a twin into the pool. When we dip them, they come up laughing, lashes spiked like urchins. I am not their mother. I don't know the words to these songs. Surprising how hard it is to hold the slippery egg of his belly as he kicks and kicks, propelling us round this aquarium. We're breathing bleachy steam with strangers passing by and glancing in. Am I holding him wrong? I am that fish with the see-through head and all its machinery on show, tubes pulsing, bulbous green eyes scanning up to the light. We hardly know what all the parts are for. The next poem I'm going to read, some of you might have noticed that last year the Oxford English Dictionary chose goblin mode as its word of the year. And that was just a strange phrase that came from lockdown, when everyone decided they were just going to become slobs, not bother looking nice, well, not bother dressing up because we were working from home, those of us who were lucky enough to be able to work from home. And this internet aesthetic grew up called Goblincore, which I recommend everybody Google because it's quite interesting and fun. But I noticed that alongside that kind of not really being so bothered about my appearance, I was paying much closer attention to things that were very close to home, to the other lives and other creatures right on the doorstep. And I got to know our local area even better than I did before. And the poem is called Goblin Core. We knew we weren't right under our clothes, our tiny wings, our fur. We practiced eye contact on frog spawn at the bottom of the garden. There were hens and eggs lying under bushes in their shamble nests, the bubbled panes of glare between our fingers, the yolk a golden toad on your palm. We've grown to like our faces wild, our chin spikes, our cobby goblin bodies. We love grass stains, the taste of green as you split a blade and owl it. We live life close to the ground, crouched and smoky, sharing each other's illnesses, taking them on like charms. Eggs broken morning, eggs freckled skin. It's always summer with the warm bodies of our hens and sisters. On winter days, your tongue's a nice lolly in my mouth. We wake with hair like frozen twigs and kick through the windows of puddles. I'm going to read a few more kind of insecty, slimy, creepy crawly type poems. And this next one I'm going to read is called A Meditation of Small Frogs. Look, climbing through moss, crisp seams down their backs. Curl your hand under them gently, 3 cool bellies on your palm, slimy intimacy with earth. Let them go, long towing back to the stream, tiny gold rings in their eyes. The next one also has quite a self-explanatory title. It's called Trapping Moths with My Father. You come to life as you name them, swallow-tailed, 20-plumed, spectacled, camouflaged by day like you, endlessly arriving on our beams of light, dust-soft drifts of them printing the white sheet. Our heads lean close in this midnight silver, and our breath curls together in the cold. Look closer, their dark wings are inscribed with eyes and feathers, hieroglyphs you understand but can't explain. They speak a lunar language and wish they could go back. The next poem as well makes me think of my father, who's in the audience as well, because I wrote it after we went for a walk in Derbyshire, in some woods in South Derbyshire called Spring Woods. And there's an old wire works there that has been abandoned, and all the factory buildings are being taken over by nature. And it was October when we went there, and there were just incredible numbers of fungi, and it was beautiful. Autumn at the wire works. It's spring again, but inside out. The woods piratical, bejeweled with pick-me reds, gem-studded puffballs, funnels of unlikely blue. There are teaspoons of jelly, dead men's fingers, brains that glow. Here we are unburied. We lug our spirits and our winter fears in backpacks until we find the waterfalls and whiskey pools, the woods distillery with copper guts and leaf clot underfoot. What's the next one? Oh, okay. This one, it's imagining a young girl who might have grown up to be a suffragette, but it's also inspired by my Aunt Marie, who she is a very independent spirit, and I think she won't mind me telling you that she was a slight arsonist when she was a child. Just a little bit. Mary, 1903. I call it doll housing. I start small, wrapping things in newsprint. Hairpins, cotton reels, ribbons, the tiny things we're taught to care about. Mustard tins and milk cans piling up in the corner of the glass house. We're high above the terraces, Mothers, grandmothers inside, backs so sore they move like wooden dolls. Father calls me poison bottle. Daughter, that plodding word full of unspoken things. Not like sun, brief and blazing. I take a match. The grass is full of speedwell, blue eyes watching. The butterflies all closed, ashy underwings like burnt letters. Oh, to be at the centre of things. A thumbnail frog on a lily pad, the drop of blood on Queen Anne's lace. The spreading ripples that show where a stone was before it disappeared. So this next poem I wrote because I wanted to write something about those kind of people who are just so effortlessly and selflessly always thinking of other people, like it just seems to come naturally to them as breathing. There's a few people like that in my life, and the poem's called Cephalophores, and a cephalophore is a type of saint who's depicted in art as carrying his own head under his arm because he was decapitated. Cephalophores. My favourite type of saint is carrying his head. He's not too attached to it, offers it to anyone who asks. Take his head from him, and his body wanders happily through gardens, feeling the colours of flowers, the grass between his toes. He can't speak, but the ivy is covered in commas. If he stands still long enough, they settle on him like the gaps between clouds. Meanwhile, his head is all mine. Someone to talk to on the bedside table, someone to tell me to buy bleach and birthday gifts. A second head, though, can make you unsure of your own. I give his back, and he takes it gratefully, preparing always to swap his head for sky and pass it on. So my granddad was one of those people that I'm talking about in Cephalophores, and he was also a navigator in the RAF. And when my brother and I were very little, I can't remember how old, but I'm guessing 10 or younger, we were out with him on our own in town, and he had a heart attack while we were with him. Luckily, he survived many more years after that, but it was obviously a very terrifying experience for him and for small children. The navigator. Your hands don't look like yours, the skin dough pale and grazed. I think of how we used to walk on walls, holding onto those huge thumbs. Even the narrow black railings by the river, one foot in front of the other, faster and faster. You were so used to fear, swallowing it quick like scalding tea in the mess, battling fog over the world shrunk to a map. We thought it was invisible to you, although later you remember where the greys came from. Walking home with us, you dragged your hand along the wall until it bled to keep you conscious, so we wouldn't be afraid. I wrote this poem, Survivors, based on hazy memories I have of being very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old at the most, and visiting elderly relatives and friends of the family with my brother. And we were too little to know our family history at that time. And so this is written from our point of view as we were then. Survivors. Oh, sorry, I just need some more water. Survivors. Aunts drink tea for hours. They have no mirrors or clocks, but each other's faces tell the time. Why do their hands shake and rattle the cups in their saucers? We prowl the flat, the hallway dark with years of coats, the dining room with carpets on the walls. Each visit, we think something will be different. but there's always the same red viewmaster with unchanging views of Prague and no TV. We draw elaborate tunnels and hold funerals for bees. The cheese plant grows towards the window. Our aunts show us a glass case of curled up figures. All we want is the china cockatoo and toy koalas. Their arms come towards us lined with numbers. We wriggle away from their touch. I studied Russian at university, and in the third year we lived in St. Petersburg for half the year, and then a small town called Yaroslav near Moscow for the rest of the time, studying Russian while we were there and generally having a good time. It was 2003-ish, I think. And in St. Petersburg, there's a very stunning onion-domed cathedral called Spasskrovan. Wow, the Russian has gone out of my head, unsurprisingly. In English, it's called the Cathedral of the Spilled Blood. And there's also just one Russian word in the poem, which is Devushki, and that just means girls. At the Cathedral of the Spilled Blood, we buy eggs painted with the silence of snow, scarves wrapped tight around our mouths. Ice crystals prickle our noses when we breathe. Mum's hiding the vodka from Granny in a high cupboard. She arrives in a red fur coat, a basket of freshly baked buns, the smell of nutmeg and cabbage. The men have eyes red from drink as they tell us again the story of the sack, the car boot, the journey south. They stand at the edge of the room like grandfather clocks. Baby sister is in her cot, wise old face turned from a single piece of birch. We carry her inside us, sisters, mothers, grandmothers, wrapped in coats and scarves until we're round as matryoshka dolls, lined up at the market beside the painted eggs. Our steps grow louder the farther we are from home, the darker it gets among the trees. When a car pulls up to the curb, my boots bite the ice like a clenched jaw. The glass winds down with a hiss. Devushki, he's saying, sing for us. Of course you can sing, pretty girls like you, and I'm not sure if it's him or Granny speaking now. We're weaponized and vitreous, ponytails brittle with frost. Under our coats, our hip bones slice our lilac jeans. The men are out of the car, blocking the pavement. Granny's hanging the eggs in the window. Their glitter's more real than the street outside. The red dots might be us in the snow. I'm going to finish with a few island poems now. So Pabe is an island in the Outer Hebrides, and during lockdown I was in Yorkshire, very landlocked, and I was just dying to get out and travel and be somewhere else. So I was thinking about Pabe, which I visited a few years ago, and I decided I wanted to write something about it, but I think the poem really ended up being more about that feeling of being quite safe and comfortable at home, but at the same time far away in distance and emotionally from other people that you love. Pabe Cliffs. Belly to grass, greenish jelly sea below. Here, next to my face, miniature worlds of moss. Tiny trees and stars, near and far as the queue of strangers behind me, waiting their turn to look down at the guillemots hidden by the cliff's pleats, each precariously at home. Oh, warm egg bodies, the rocks look soft enough down there, greened with weed. In the distance, killer whales, fins tall as you. This next poem is more of an imagined place. It's called Asteroidia, and Asteroidia is the biological class that starfish belong to. The sea is far above my head, like the sky in a child's drawing. Instead of stars, starfish, brittle, spiny, bloody Henry, crown of thorns. Blue deep fish, pajama sharks, a shoal of swans with silver feet. There's a lone diver in red, drifting like kelp. How will he get down? My abalone toenails scrunch the sand. Strange that I can hear so much. Should coral squeak like clean hair as it grows? Do fish jangle like cutlery? This might be the sea after all, a place among currents where sharks in black and grey stripes swim past too fast to notice. It's raining jellyfish. They fall at my feet like things in jars. And the last poem I'm going to read is the final poem in the book, which is also about imaginary islands, although inspired by a lot of the islands I've been to. And I wrote this poem after I saw a man on Twitter say that he couldn't imagine what women between the ages of 40 and 80 were going to do with their lives if they didn't have children. This horrible tweet prompted a really lovely thread of all kinds of people who didn't have kids just talking about the plans they had for their lives, and it was lovely. And that is where this poem came from. Swimming between islands. The island you were born on is crammed with cabinets and grandfather clocks. Nearby, the island of children with its shrieks and red tapestries, and the island of one day when. You have the sea and its bed, a silvery current of hair, and a necklace of eggs where 100 new things grow. The horizon looks toothed, but those are more islands. The island of slow translation, the island of choirs, an island of frogs who spend their lives inside flowers. On some you'll find you breathe better underwater than in their thundery air. Soon you'll have an island forest, ribcage ferns exhaling green. Swimmers will come to your house to borrow your eyes. Thanks. Hi, Rebecca.
Hello, Charlotte. Thank you very much for that wonderful reading. It was beautiful, and the poems are beautiful. And it's so lovely to hear you read them. Having spent a lot of time with them, it's really nice to hear you read them. And the comments, I know you try not to be distracted by them, don't you? But they have been really lovely, pouring in. So I know you can look at those later. So thank you, everyone, for contributing to the chat and listening closely. So I just thought we could chat a little bit about poems and the book, and then I'll open it up to everyone out there, and I will sort of encourage you to. I'm not hugely techie, so if questions could be directed to the Q&A box, that would be great, and then I'll know where to find them. Thank you. Yeah, reading the collection, it's such a sort of an immersive experience in everything from your sort of slimy creatures, as you say, those slimy things, to then all that tenderness about family, but also lots of vulnerability there, and then the islands themselves, and what does that actually mean, how you expand that word island in the book. So I really enjoyed all of that. One thing I haven't really got a question. I guess it's more of I'm going to make an observation and ask you to turn it into a question, I think.
That's fine.
One thing I really noticed is that you have these objects in the collection, like and they're sort of recurring images and recurring objects, like eggs and nests, and there's shells and moths and babies and hearts, all referred to. And it made me think about how resilient those objects are, how strong they can be, but equally very susceptible to hurt, and can at times be incredibly defenseless things. And I was very conscious of how of the object being both those things whenever I saw it in a poem, and I wondered if any of that chimed with you in any way.
It does. Yeah, it was only putting the poems together, I think, as a book and kind of laying all my work out on the living room floor and noticing that there are so many recurring images, like the eggs and so many frogs. And it's it's sort of, it almost feels, I think it can seem intentional that those objects appear in poems, like that I'm actually putting them there on purpose, but it doesn't, I think it's coming from somewhere less conscious of what, apart from, so Goblin Core contains a lot of eggs, and I wrote that after Laura Scott, the poet, had pointed out to me that there were a lot of eggs in my poems, and people are always asking me, why all the eggs? So I'm trying to work out an answer to this. I think it just comes down to what I've always been paying attention to. I mean, the fact that these things recur, the things that I always pay attention to ever since I was little and before I even wrote poetry, are small, defenseless creatures, insects, delicate things, I suppose. And I've been trying to work out why it is. And I think it starts from the fact that the British countryside is generally full of small, hidden, quite mysterious creatures. It's not like an African plain out there with giraffes and lions that you can just see really clearly. And so I think I've always been fascinated by the kind of hidden, half-seen mysteriousness of moths, especially things like bats and moths and hares, things that are quite hard to see and escape quite easily. So, and that is one way in which they're resilient and protect themselves, is that they can just run away. And so I think that those objects are just part of kind of the landscape of my imagination. They're the matter I draw, and when I'm writing a poem, it's usually about something else. I'm not usually intending to write about eggs or about deer, but it's like a database of things that I take from my mind and my observations that I use to tell a story in a poem.
That's rather nice what you said as well about the that these things that you're drawn to are quite hard to see, like the moths or the bats or these tiny creatures that escape. So in a way, and so you rely on your imagination for part of it to bring them to the fore, but also when you said they're quite hard to see, it's almost as if your poems are some sort of there's a benign capturing going on then, isn't there? That you,
I think that's what it is. I think it's because you've only half seen or half experienced these things, that you want to kind of fully capture in a kind of benign just recording them and acknowledging them kind of way. And
because it says that too on the back of your book, doesn't it, about how you do invite your reader to come very close to something. And I always thought about that about your poems. You know, the poems I read years ago, I thought that too. And it says about how you invite the reader to come close and keep them right in the center of the poem. And I think that's what you're doing, keeping us very close to all these experiences. But there's something I quite like that mystery and magic about them then, that it's all half imagined. They're not purely poems of observation, are they? There's much more going on in them, I think. And anyway, I think.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is the trying to bring the reader close comes from that. I think when I'm writing, not when I'm physically writing the poem, but when I'm out and starting to think of a poem in my mind, it's a way of being like fully inhabiting the moment and trying to get everything that you can out of it, and then actually creating the poem kind of captures or keeps that moment and expands it and explores it a little bit further. So it's like it's a kind of record of experience, but and also trying like the poem as an experience in itself is what I'm trying to aim for, I think.
That's nice. And when I said that about there being sort of these objects that are both sort of strong and vulnerable, and I see that a bit in your poems that involve family as well. There's lots of sort of fear and vulnerability there, but I also like how there's some you don't do it in a very explicit way, and I always admire poets who can do it much less explicitly than I can in a poem. So for example, that poem about the navigator, I didn't know the backstory behind it, but I already felt so much fear in that poem, and then that was amplified by your introduction and what you told us about your grandfather. And but I think you in the poems you weave very successfully, I think, between that idea of fear and vulnerability in relationships and family dynamics, and what it is to be very close to somebody, what it is to be close to somebody too. And do you find it easy to write about family like that in a way,
I think it's actually easier than writing more directly. I think I think using islands as well, kind of as a metaphor in some cases, or using the landscape to show the kind of push and pull between strength and vulnerability, between closeness and between the need to pull away. And there's a lot in my family poems about the tension between wanting to be domestic and at home and wanting to be out and wild. And the fact that I think everybody obviously needs to be able to move between the two. I wouldn't say I find it easy to write about family, but I think it is easier to do it indirectly.
And it's interesting then what you said about using landscape to do that, particularly, which leads very nicely, well done, Charlotte, into my next question, really, about that you are, it's been said that that you write the modern pastoral, that your poems can be described as that, and you are using landscape and nature and the natural world, but and you and I have talked before about how we use this, and as I've got older, I myself have wanted to write much more about the natural world, but I wouldn't ever call myself a nature poet. I kind of wouldn't dare to, really. I think there are other people doing a lot better than me, and I wouldn't call myself an eco poet. But there is this thing about where do we fit, and of course your book is going into the world of being reviewed, and it's interesting what people will say, and I wondered how you feel about that term nature poet, and where you see yourself fitting, perhaps.
I think that it depends. First of all, it depends how you are defining nature poet or eco poet, because if you define it as somebody who's specifically setting out to write about nature or to raise awareness of some aspect of the destruction of habitat and climate change, then I wouldn't put myself in that category. I think I'm obviously a nature poet to some extent because there's so much nature in most of my poems. But I think it comes more for me that poetry is just part of my everyday life, kind of. I write it around the edges of every day. And I've always lived in a village with fields surrounding me. So when I was a child, weekends would just be playing with one friend and a load of ladybirds. I wasn't surrounded by tall buildings and cities and crowds of people. And so what I learned to pay attention to was the wildlife in the countryside and nature. And I have lived in cities for small amounts of time, but I do, again, live in a small village, and I go out for walks every day. So what I'm paying attention to is, I think I said this before, it's the natural world and the lives of the creatures that we share our space with. And that just comes into my poems in a non-intentional way. But if a side effect of my work was that people ended up paying attention to moths more, or to the lack of insects more, then that would be amazing. I would love that, and I'd be quite happy for somebody to call me an eco poet, but I wouldn't say it's something I'm setting out to do, because I think, I just don't know. I don't know what I would end up writing next, and I don't really want to plan it.
Who knows what we're setting out to do, but I like that idea of a kind of using side effect in a really positive way there, side effect from reading. I'm going to look at the Q&A now, Charlotte, and read some of those out, if that's all right, while we've got time. Lydia Kenway has a question which says, you mentioned the challenge of ordering the collection. Could you tell us more about that process, please?
Yes, hi Lydia, thank you for asking a question. That was, I would say, the most challenging part of putting the book together. I didn't have too much trouble deciding which poems to put in the book. I just, yeah, they kind of fell naturally together. But in terms of ordering them, when you've got 50 odd poems, there are so many different ways that, especially when you've got poems that are dealing with similar themes and have similar images, you can rearrange them so that they tell a completely different kind of, it's not really a narrative arc, but it's a completely different feel. Like I could have gone in the direction of, like I thought about dotting the island poems throughout the collection, so that there was kind of like an archipelago of island poems, and then you've got the more domestic family poems among them. And yeah, I just kept rearranging it constantly until the deadline, basically. So it's almost like luck that they arrived in this order, but it was definitely intentional. I was making sure that the poems next to each other were speaking to each other in a helpful way. And in the end, it just felt, I think because of the mood of the poem, like I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of tension between domesticity and wildness. I think moving from the domestic indoor poems towards the islands and nature and wildness and mythological themes towards the end just became the most natural arc for the book for me. But I don't have any particular tips on how to organize a book apart from just try all different things and see what happens.
Lovely, thank you, Charlotte. We have a question here from your editor, Michael Schmidt. He said there is a wonderful, unironic innocence about the voice of the poems. I'm wondering whether you think irony will find its way in to move you forward into other geographies and histories, or would irony close off the nourishing world of childhood and shared innocence?
That is a very difficult question. Yeah, I think probably a natural development in my work might be to write fewer poems set in childhood with the voices of girls and the voice of girlhood, but I'm very much not an ironic person. I'm not going to say that I'm intentionally writing with an innocent voice, but I don't think irony is the direction that I'm going to go into, just because I'm a little bit too straightforward and literal for that, and it's just not really how my writing process works either. It's more based on observation and genuine experience. I'm not saying the book's autobiographical, because I've made up way too much stuff in it for it to be autobiographical, but I think truth is all I can really write about, if that answers the question.
Thank you, Charlotte. I'm sure it does. Pete Green has a question. Wonderful reading, Charlotte. Great to hear from a fellow Maine. Islands are super rich with symbolic potential, but in writing this collection, did you find yourself resisting that urge at times and just letting an island be an island?
I think probably in the older poems in the book, which would be, I'm actually not sure if I read any of the older island poems, but if anyone has the book or is going to get the book, there are a few that I wrote really early on in my writing life. Like Fata Morgana is a poem about when I went to the Lofoten Islands in 2014, I think it was. And that was really based just on observation of the Lofoten Islands and of the this Fata Morgana mirage that occurred on the horizon as we were sailing towards the island. So yeah, I think there's definitely some island poems that are just about islands, and I think a lot of the time that something like an island or an insect will appear in a poem and subsequently come to mean something that it didn't in the beginning, and in the context of the rest of the book as well. I think probably some of the island poems that were more literal come to mean something else, because I mean they came out of my brain, and there's obviously stuff going on in there that I didn't know about when I was writing it. So I think it's hard to let anything in a poem just be a thing in a poem completely.
Yeah, that's interesting, Charlotte. Thank you. Judith says, your words are wonderful and the poems are moving and to me very visual. But I have to confess, I love the cover as much of the poems, and I noticed the cover art is by you. So I was wondering about the relationship between your art and your poetry. And it's nice that everybody knows that that cover is now by you.
Yeah, the cover is by me. I've always, the relationship between my art and my poetry is, I didn't start writing poetry until maybe my late 20s. So I've been doing it for about 10 years. Because before that, I was very much more of a visual artist, just as a hobby. It was just what I focused on. But I always knew that I wanted to write, but I always felt like, because I had a job and not that much free time, there was a tension between, do I sit down this afternoon and do some art, or do I write some poems? And I think that in terms of painting and visual art, my art is much more literal. It's much more observation, and very much, it's more relaxing to me to write, to draw something than it is to write a poem, because it's just copying purely from life. And I'm actually trying to develop a more illustrative style, but I haven't quite got there yet. I didn't do the painting for the cover for this book. It just happened to work really well. It's a digital watercolor done in Procreate on the iPad. And I taught myself how to use Procreate in lockdown when I was really bored. And so I've been doing a lot more visual art since I learned that. Yeah, I'm pleased that the picture works well with the book.
Lovely. Thank you, Charlotte. And just before I go back to the Q&A, there is one question I've noticed in the chat. So I'm just going to read that out, actually. And it's from Nancy, if I can. Oh, has it disappeared? It was here. Yes, here we are. Sorry. It says, you seem to use suggestion in your work, like you leave clues along the way with a lot unsaid. This creates a mystery in your work, although the work satisfies and delivers with a meaning. Is this intentional? We maybe touched a bit on this in our chat about the mystery, but yeah, is it intentional? It's
intentional not to reveal too much, or not to try to reveal too much, I suppose. I think for me, the kind of poems that I like are ones that you don't really get straight away, but there's something that draws you back to reread it. And in some ways you might get something different from it every time you read it, and you bring your own associations and images to it. So I think that is why I mean, it seems too intentional to say you aim to create a sense of mystery, but I just aim to, I try not to explain too much. I try to let the reader be like a co-creator of the poem, because that's what I like to read, basically.
If I can quote you, actually, and Nancy, this may be of interest, Charlotte has written herself on the blog, actually, writing poetry for me has always felt like treading a fine line between clarity for the reader and the creation of emotion and atmosphere during the reading experience. And I think that also plays into it, as in, we do find ourselves feeling, satisfied. The work is satisfying us. You are delivering something, definitely. You are delivering meaning, as Nancy said, but yes, it is that fine line between clarity and what we understand. But I definitely found as a reader, and I'm sure people will who buy the book, that I got more and more from it each time I read it. And when I go back to the poems, I see something different, which is really nice. I'm just going to nip back and look at the... Oh, it's your question, Nancy. There's in the Q&A box as well. So there we go. But if anybody has any others they'd like to add, please do that now if you'd like to. And yes, so also you may as well tell everyone here that you've got readings coming up, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
Live ones, real
Yeah,
ones.
actual in-person readings. This is the first time I've read from the book at all, but the first in-person reading I'm doing is next week on the 1st of March. If anybody is near Leeds, there's the Leeds Literature Festival reading based at the University of Leeds called Spring Rhythm. It's on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, and Zafar Kunial is reading, and Matt Howard, Kimberly Campanello. It's a whole load of poets from Leeds will be reading, and that'll be my first time reading from the book. And then I'm doing a launch in person in London with Laura Scott on the 5th of April. The actual details and tickets and things are not quite sorted yet, but if anyone is around London on the 5th of April, it would be lovely to see you. And Laura Scott's new book is amazing as well, so you can hear that.
Thank you. But it has been a real pleasure to hear you read them this evening. And there's something about your poems that quite suit the silence of a Zoom reading, actually, because we are transported to these places, actually. There's something very enjoyable about that. And there were some super comments as well, so I do hope you read it. And one of my favourites, I think it was from Tanya Hirschman, when after you read that beautiful poem about trapping the moths with your father. And I think you said, Tanya, something like, oh, a wonderful poem all about moths and not about moths. And that is a kind of nice way to slightly summarize your work, for want of a better word, I think. All about it and not about that at all, about lots of other things. So Carcanet, as you can see, Jasmine has just popped a link into the chat now, where you can purchase your discounted copy of Charlotte's book, which I highly recommend. And hello, Jasmine.
Thanks, Rebecca.
But I just want to really thank, and I know you can't hear it, Charlotte, but it really was a very beautiful evening. Thank you very much, and thanks for being very patient with my questions, and thank you for the really interesting contributions from everyone out there. And congratulations, you'll be very proud of yourself, Charlotte.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for your lovely questions as well. It's been very nice to talk about the book.
I want to reiterate all of that. Yes, thank you guys so much. It was such a pleasure to hear those poems, like, so close. I felt like we were so close to them. Yeah, so well done, congratulations, and thank you, Rebecca, for hosting, and thank you guys for all of your messages and your questions. It was really great to see them coming in this evening. Like Rebecca said, I did put the link in the chat for you. Please go and buy a book. You can send the discount code to your friends. Please do tell everyone to buy one. And please join us for those launches. Subscribe to our newsletter and you'll find out the details about when we're launching the book in person in London, and the other readings that are coming up. So the last thing that I want to tell you about is our next Zoom launch, which is in a week's time. It'll be on the 1st of March. We are launching a posthumous publication from Thomas Kinsella. It's called Last Poems. There's a whole host of readers who are joining us to read his final poems. So please check the website and join us then. So that's everything. Congratulations again, Charlotte, and thank you guys very much. I'll leave the chat open for you to put your last messages in there. But that's everything. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Jazz. Bye.